Well, basically, it was just all Birmingham musicians with two good songwriters in the band, and we formed and actually did two singles. The album never got released for one reason or another, but we were real popular in Liverpool. We played there more than anywhere else, and we got voted a couple of times Band of the Year down there. And it was kind of a college and a university underground type band. Well, we had a telephone call from an agent called George Cooper, who actually used to manage Joe Brown, and he also used to work Gene Vincent when he was in England, and he used to get him gigs and stuff. But because we worked for that agency, they rang us up and asked us if we wanted to back him on a British tour, and as we were all into rock and roll, we sort of jumped at it really.
In, I believe, 1971, I'd moved from my hometown of Tamworth in the Midlands area of England, which is where Birmingham is, that whole area. And I'd played in a band there and became friends with David Bailey, who's the keyboard player in that band, and also Bob Moore, who was the drummer in that band. And then Gene brought over an American guitar player with him, and just basically asked if I would like to do a short tour, you know, of England with Gene Vincent, of course, which I jumped at the chance. Absolutely. Gene, the original aggro boy, sure, yeah, I'll do that.
I mean, we used to do a couple of Gene Vincent tracks in the set before we even worked with him anyway. It was basically a sort of rock and roll orientated band, Suck anyway. So it was great to be asked to do it. We'd done a few backing tours with various other people as well, but they weren't quite as big as Gene Vincent was. So when we had the offer to do it, that was great. The first time we met him, he was brought from the airport to the rehearsal room with a guy called Richard Cole, who was actually managing Gene at the time, who was the guitarist in the band. He was sort of managing him and playing guitar. When I actually first met him at the rehearsal, it was kind of strange because he turned up, basically said hello and then disappeared down to the pub, which was sort of odd. And then a guy called Lee Tracy, who was a friend of Gene's, actually took over the rehearsal part for him. So instead of Gene doing the words, this guy knew all the lyrics. So Gene was down the pub having a drink, and this other fella was doing all the words, and we thought, well, hang on, you know. Anyway, a few hours later, Gene returned, having been down the pub all day. So the actual rehearsal only involved him only to a small extent. It was this other guy, Lee Tracy, doing all the words. And then when we finally got to speak to Gene, he seemed like really distant. And he had minutes when he was really funny, and then other minutes when he was really sort of like unapproachable. So it was very strange. One minute he'd be sort of on an upper, and it'd be great to talk to, or telling a joke. And then within a few minutes, he was almost gone into a funny mood. But I say the rehearsal was a sham, really, because he wasn't there.
He was not particularly quiet, but not something that I could possibly say, oh yeah, he was a great guy and we talked about cars, or we talked about aeroplanes or women, or, you know, we got down to business and did the rehearsal, and it was, my gosh, I was playing with Gene Vincent. How cool was that? You know, there's not many people. As it turned out, which I wasn't to realise, I was going to be the last bass guitarist on the planet to play with him. So I didn't know that at the time, but just to be able to play with Gene, to put that on my resume, in my book, couldn't be bad. From what I can recall, I think it was going to be approximately a 3-week tour, which probably involved 16, 17, 18 shows in England.
What it was, we were actually, the contract involved doing a radio session for BBC Radio, which in fact we turned up a week early, which was one of those weird things. They gave us the wrong date, and Gene turned up a week early as well. He had a big load of flowers. Where he got them from, I don't know. Appeared in the studio and put them bang on top of the piano, which I thought was rather odd at the time. And the guy then, as I say, turned around and said, "What are you guys doing here?" And he said, "You are going to do a session, but actually you're here a week early." So it was all a big management mess up, really. We played a session for Granada TV, which was a tea time show. But the actual club gigs we did was the Garrick Theatre at Lee, which is near Manchester, the Wookey Hollow in Liverpool, which was the other one. But there were, as I say, there were other clubs that we were due to play at. But as Gene got worse with his health and other problems that he had with the court case in London with his ex-wife and stuff like that, it meant that some of the ongoing gigs got cancelled. It was a bit of a blow, really, because one of them was only up the road from where I live, and that got cancelled, the Belfry. So that was a shame.
If I'm correct in my thinking, it was pretty much, the whole thing with Gene was pretty much just, let's get this done, let's get going. You know, I don't remember any particularly upsetting situations or any jovial situations or anything really in between. It was pretty much, again though, in those days when a tour was put on the way it was, you know, you bring over the artist and then one other guy to take care of everything, who was usually a musician, part of the band as well. It was pretty much a set order, so it wasn't like there was really going to be any large friendships made out of this whole ordeal, you know. But from what I can recall, it was pretty much a standard, get in there, let's get these songs done, you know, let's get it going. Gene was a pretty angsty guy. I don't think he had a lot of time for triviality, let's say. It was, let's get this going, let's get this done, let's go and get the gigs done. I think Gene was very much in the mould of what was happening, you know. Gene relating to the music that was happening that time, yeah, I think in fact he was probably a big trendsetter of it. Careful, Tommy. He was probably a big trendsetter of that. I don't think Gene felt like it was too late, or maybe back then you couldn't tell it was late or early, but I think Gene, I don't think that was a part of his train of thought at all.
I don't think he'd had any bearing on the gigs that we ever played, because all the ones we did, even though we had one or two of them that never came off, but the ones we actually played on, they were all the hardcore Gene Vincent fans. I don't think anything music present or past had any bearing on it. They were just all the people who were specifically there to see Gene. All rockers, if you like, and a few others included. You know, sort of, if you like, there was a kind of like a cabaret touch to it as well, because they were basically cabaret clubs that we played with Gene. They were known for putting on cabaret artists. So there wasn't so much of a hippie movement there than a rock and roll come middle of the road crowd. There was a guy who we were at the hotel with called Dave D, who's had a lot of hits over here, who Gene got very pally with. But they were all up and coming dance troupes and trios and jugglers and magicians and people like that. We nearly got thrown out the club actually the one night, because the bass player in the band, who actually moved to America and joined a band called Poco and did real well for himself. He was only young at the time and he was sort of heckling to a couple of the acts. So Gene told him to cool it. He nearly gave him a good hiding. So that was funny as well. But he was only 16, that kid on bass, you know. So he's done all right for himself there. He's working, as I still recall, with Roger McGuinn, who was with the Byrds. And he's doing stuff, all session stuff with Glenn Campbell, and he's worked with Rod Stewart and everybody, Frankie Miller, Leo Sayer, all sorts. But he was only a baby when he joined us, and Gene said to him, "Shut up, you're just a silly little boy." That was his exact words. I remember that.
The influence that Gene had on my career, I hate to say this, but I'm not terribly sure if it had a large influence. At that point in my career, I was in the middle of being what I thought was a bass player to actually becoming very serious about it. It was right on that ebb, and when I did get very serious about it, all my heroes are black. You know, your Chuck Rainey's and your Gerald Jamotts of the world, and therefore I can't really honestly say that he had a massive influence. It was more an influence of life. I was very excited to play with Gene, very excited, because I knew, I was aware that at some point that was going to be on my resume, which, my gosh, you know, little did I know that he was going to go back to, you know, America in a matter of, I think it was 10 days, not be with us anymore.
And did you actually record any songs with Gene?
We did indeed. That was when we turned up the next week at BBC at Maida Vale, and I think we did 5 numbers in total, one of which we'd never done before. He just made it up as he went along, which was an old Jim Reeves one, Distant Drums. But all the other numbers were like out and out rock and roll numbers, Whole Lot of Shaking and Say Mama, all his stage stuff. And suddenly he just said, can we do this Jim Reeves tune, which we'd never done. And we just sort of did it in one take. It turned out really well. So that was pretty good.
Can you tell me about the very last show you played with Gene at the Wookey Hollow Club?
Well, as I recall, that was a pretty good gig, although his voice seemed to be... he was taking that much medication and that much stuff for his throat. You know, you could tell his performance wasn't that good, and he seemed to be getting worse over a period of time. But that club was great. It's really strange. You could go over like a bridge to get to the stage, and the band played real well, and he went down really well with the crowd. But you could see he was straining to hit the notes. It was as if, you know, he was on his last legs, to be honest, with his throat and all the rest of it, and the drink and all the rest of it. And I think it was starting to show at those Wookey Hollow gigs towards the end. It was as if he was, you know, not feeling too well at all. And I think it was playing a big part of all that, how we actually went down with the crowd as a show, but you could see he wasn't hitting the notes and stuff like that. He was changing keys and numbers halfway through because he couldn't hit the notes. He'd vary the key as you were going along so it would fit in. So you could imagine it wasn't the best of shows really from that point of view. I think it was Gene's stagecraft that pulled it through. Even though he was unwell, he got the charisma of a great front man with all his gear on and all the rest of it. And I think he got away with it with his stage act, other than his vocal ability, that pulled him through it, to be honest.
If I was to be asked the difference between watching him on a show like Top of the Pops or Ready Steady Go to standing on stage alongside him, was there a difference? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It was the same, let's say, aggravated person with the same in-your-face stance, you know, with the leg, you know, the whole thing. That was just Gene. He never changed that 1 minute. There was one occasion in particular that springs to mind when I think of my days with Gene. It saddens me really to think about it, but nevertheless it's a fact. We played the last date. As we did the next morning, got up and had breakfast, which was part of the ritual. You know, at the hotel you get your breakfast, so everybody had their breakfast and Gene wasn't there. And after we had breakfast, I'm not sure if the other fellows went to pack their cases, but I remember going outside and seeing Gene sitting on the curb, the pavement, in England, with his, you know, his feet in the road and his butt on the pavement, and with a bottle of vodka which probably had I should think about that much left in the bottom of it, and he was pretty sauced. That was the day that he said, I'm done. Yeah, he drank a lot, but at the same time, I'm not really sure if Gene was an alcoholic per se, as much as that damn leg. I think he tried to hide his pain behind that, which of course mars a person's vision, you know. Alcohol, boy. So I can see him hiding himself through it, but yeah, he drank a lot. He drank all the time.
I'm not exactly versed with what the problems were, but I know he was carrying a gun round with him because one night he forgot his cases in Manchester and we came down to Birmingham and we had to open one of the cases to put some of his back in, and sure enough there was the pistol in there. So I don't know whether he'd had a run-in with the law about carrying a gun, but I can tell you now he certainly had one, because we sent the case back on Red Star, which is a delivery service, a courier. The next day we just got rid of it, knowing full well there was a gun in there. But I think he'd had a few runs in with the law over different matters, but I'm not really sure what they were. Maybe it was the gun. It certainly wasn't a pea shooter.
What else do I recall from that? I remember thinking that maybe someday, actually, if I could know what I know now, it's that whole scenario, how important he was to rock and roll. I mean, Gene, thankfully, you know, you've come to do this documentary because it needs to be heard. And it hasn't been by any stretch of any imagination. I think he was largely responsible for an amazing amount of musicians and certainly vocalists. How many people have copied Gene's stance, that aggressive face that he had, you know, the whole microphone lean thing. I mean, you know, Rod Stewart's done it, bless his heart. Whether he'd want to admit to it or not, but that's none of my business. But, you know, Johnny Rotten did it. Jim Morrison did it. A lot of people have copied that, whether they like it or not, or whether they're even conscious of it. But